Hey guys, tonight we're slipping under the creaky floorboards of time to visit a world before electric lights, before smartphones, before sleep hygiene apps told you to stop doom scrolling at 11. You're lying on a too-firm mattress stuffed with horsehair, staring up at the high ceiling of your Victorian townhouse. The wallpaper, faded florals and faint mildew, is peeling slightly in the corners. A single gaslight hisses in the hallway, throwing long, twitching shadows across the room. It's 3:17 a.m., and you're awake. Not just awake, but aware. The kind of awareness where your thoughts spiral like a wind-up clock that's been overwound. You wonder if you locked the front door. You wonder what you said at dinner. You wonder if Queen Victoria ever lay awake like this, staring at the ceiling, unsure if she'd remembered to write back to Florence Nightingale. The gaslight flares suddenly, brightening the room with a low pop, just a pressure shift in the pipes, but enough to make your heart thud once, too loudly. Somewhere down the cobblestone street, a carriage wheel clicks against a loose paving stone. The horses snort, their hooves echoing like distant thunder in the quiet. You're not alone in being awake. This is the ghost hour, as many Victorians whispered it. The time when the veil is thin, and the house itself might sigh. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with ghost stories was due to spiritualism, widespread death, or just a lot of overcooked cabbage at dinner. But what's certain is that nighttime was when all the unresolved grief, empire guilt, and bad plumbing came home to roost. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to comment below with your location and local time. I always love seeing who else is lying awake in the middle of the night, halfway between a dream and a Wikipedia rabbit hole. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie back against a slightly too flat pillow, and the smell of starch and lavender water tickles your nose. Victorians were obsessed with appearances, even in sleep. Night clothes were clean, buttoned, and occasionally monogrammed. The nightcap wasn't just for warmth. It kept hair tidy, and possibly one's dreams as well. But dreams seem far away right now. This was an age before widespread electric lighting, which means once darkness came, your body started winding down by candlelight. Melatonin production, unbothered by blue light, should be working perfectly. But no, there's that tightness in your chest again. You're wide awake in a century with no internet, no late-night TV, and no podcasts gently whispering about Roman aqueducts. What you do have is silence, broken only by the occasional clink of expanding pipes or the house settling like an old man sighing into a chair. And with silence comes company, your thoughts. In Victorian times, they didn't call it overthinking. They might say you were troubled or melancholic. Maybe you've got a touch of the vapors or a bilious imbalance. Either way, you're lying there in your four-poster bed, ruminating about mortality, bank debts, and whether your soul is pure enough to avoid spontaneous combustion. Yes, that was a thing they worried about. Thanks, Bleak House. Downstairs, the kitchen clock ticks. You count the beats like a prisoner might count drips from a leaky ceiling. You try to remember something calming, like that one time you rode a penny farthing into the countryside, only to fall spectacularly and earn the admiration of a passing milkmaid. But even pleasant memories feel too sharp right now. Your body won't settle. So what did Victorians do when sleep didn't come? They walked. Yes, people in dressing gowns and slippers padded quietly through the halls at ungodly hours, trying not to disturb others, or ghosts. Night wandering wasn't uncommon. Many insomniacs of the era believed movement helped realign the humors, or at least gave the mind something to do. Of course, this came with risks. You could run into the maid, who might scream, or into your aunt, who thought all insomniacs were morally suspect. A fringe belief even held that too much sleep was decadent, that a true intellectual didn't require more than 5 hours a night. Sleep was for farmers and fools. This wakeful wisdom trend trickled down from elite circles, where gentlemen bragged about late-night reading habits and early morning fencing practice. But for the average Victorian, being awake at this hour meant guilt. Guilt that you weren't productive. Guilt that you were unwell. Guilt that perhaps your soul was restless for a reason. Maybe you offended someone. Maybe you ate too much mutton. Maybe, just maybe, you're being haunted by your own conscience. Victorians were no strangers to existential dread, especially in the witching hours. After all, they were living in a time of immense contradiction. A booming empire built on industry and colonialism, yet filled with people who were terrified of mirrors falling off walls. They preached family values but sent children to work in coal mines. They loved science but also believed that table tapping could summon Uncle Reginald from the beyond. You shift under the blankets, which are heavy with wool and possibly guilt. There's a popular notion floating around, based on studies of pre-industrial societies, that humans might be naturally inclined toward segmented sleep. That is, 2 chunks of sleep with a waking period in between. This first sleep and second sleep idea may explain why so many people in history, including the Victorians, didn't freak out when they found themselves awake at 3 a.m. They lit a candle. They wrote in their diary. They waited. Some historians embrace this theory. Others say it's overblown. After all, not everyone in the Victorian era had time to muse under flickering lamplight, especially if you worked a 14-hour day in a match factory. But for you, in your middle-class bed, the pause between sleep cycles has become a full-blown anxiety concert. Still, there's comfort in imagining thousands of others lying awake just like you, staring at the ceiling, wondering if life always felt this confusing. And with that oddly calming thought, you exhale. You reach for the glass of water on the nightstand. It's tepid, but strangely comforting. The ceiling still looms, but your eyes start to blur a little. Not sleep. Not yet. But close. You don't remember getting up exactly. One moment you're staring at the ceiling, and the next, your bare feet are pressing against the cold wooden floor. You're drifting through the darkness of your Victorian bedroom like a confused ghost in its own house, trying to remember if you're headed for the privy or the medicine cabinet. There, on the corner table, sits a brown bottle of laudanum, the Victorian answer to every existential question. Insomnia? Laudanum. A stubbed toe? Laudanum. Marital disappointment, indigestion, or the crushing realization of mortality? Oh, absolutely. Laudanum. You unscrew the stopper and give it a cautious sniff. It smells like desperation and cheap perfume, probably because it's a mix of opium and alcohol. Victorian apothecaries loved their tinctures, and this one was marketed as a miracle for sleeplessness. Even respectable middle-class women had a vial tucked into their nightstand, nestled right beside the lavender sachets and their slowly unraveling self-control. You consider the dosage. The label recommends 5 to 25 drops in water as needed, which is reassuringly vague. 25 drops could knock you out or make you see Queen Victoria in your soup. Historians still argue whether laudanum was more dangerous for its addictiveness or the fact that nobody really knew what as needed meant. But still, you sip and wait. The taste is bitter and medicinal, like someone melted despair into a spoonful of ink. You chase it with water, the kind that's been sitting in a glass for hours and now tastes vaguely of dust and silver. Victorian medicine was, to put it gently, a charming mixture of folklore, guesswork, and enthusiastic poisoning. If laudanum didn't work, you could always try leeches. Yes, leeches. Bloodletting was still in fashion for some. The logic was that too much blood, especially the bad kind, caused overstimulation of the brain. So, a few leeches behind the ears, and voila. You're either cured or unconscious from blood loss. You touch your neck, just in case. Of course, leeches were more of a last resort. For the average upper-class insomniac, the nightly ritual usually involved some combination of tepid milk, whispered prayer, and mild chemical dependence. There were also chloral hydrate sleeping draughts, sometimes prescribed by the new class of Victorian physicians, who were just beginning to distinguish themselves from barbers with scalpels. You sit now in a slipper chair by the fireplace, which has gone out, leaving behind a faint smell of coal and regret. The laudanum is starting to hit, but gently, like fog rolling over a harbor. You feel yourself detach slightly from your thoughts, which is frankly a relief, because your thoughts have been behaving badly tonight. You wonder if Charles Dickens ever felt like this. Probably. He walked the streets of London at night, wrestling with insomnia, mourning the deaths of loved ones, and mentally composing new chapters of Bleak House. You think about that. Walking for hours because sleep was nowhere to be found. And unlike today's walks, tracked by fitness apps and accompanied by podcasts, these walks were quiet, solitary, and full of soot. Then again, maybe the laudanum is making you romanticize things. You pull your shawl tighter and glance out the window. There's a figure across the street, silhouetted by gaslight. They're pacing slowly. You imagine they, too, are an insomniac. Or perhaps a burglar. Or perhaps both. The Victorian criminal world was full of sleepy thieves, many of whom committed petty crimes under cover of darkness simply because they had nowhere else to be. You yawn, but your body still resists rest. The laudanum numbs the panic, but not the wakefulness. It's like a broken lullaby on repeat. You're not really awake, not really asleep, just floating, a condition the Victorians sometimes referred to as the night mind. Quack doctors loved to write about the night mind, attributing it to everything from magnetic imbalances to poor moral fiber. One pamphlet warned that too much nighttime rumination could shrink the frontal lobe, a theory we now know is absolute nonsense, but at the time terrified plenty of readers into buying brain tonics made from celery and cow marrow. you decide against the cow marrow. Instead, you pull out a small handwritten recipe card. Your aunt sent it last month, a natural remedy for sleeplessness. Boil chamomile with a pinch of nutmeg and a thimble of brandy. Drink before prayer. You've tried it. It tastes like sweet dirt. But something about the ritual feels comforting. Victorians were deeply invested in ritual, especially when it came to health. The act of preparing a sleeping draught, measuring, heating, sipping, was half the cure. There was faith in the process, even if the ingredients were wildly ineffective. Some even believed that placing a cold iron key under your pillow would draw excess mind heat from your brain and into the metal. Why? Who knows? But try telling a desperate, exhausted person that something won't work. You pour yourself the last of the chamomile blend and settle deeper into the chair. The city outside has grown quieter. Even the gaslights seem drowsy now, their flames low and wavering. You can almost hear the breathing of the house around you. Pipes creaking, walls sighing, a distant mouse dragging some forgotten crumb into a corner. The Victorians didn't have many options, but they had persistence. They would try anything once, sometimes twice. The line between treatment and torture was blurry. Some wore vinegar-soaked socks to draw out bad spirits. Others sat with their feet in mustard baths while reciting Psalm 91. And then there were the truly fringe believers who slept in lead-lined boxes to prevent spiritual interference. You stretch your legs. The laudanum haze is now a gentle fog. Not sleep, not yet, but the panic is gone. You feel almost like you're underwater, heavy, muted, outside time. You think about the other insomniacs in your neighborhood. The lonely widow down the street with her constant clicking knitting needles. The failed novelist upstairs who reads Aristotle to his cat. The stable boy who drinks too much cider and sings to himself in the garden. Each of them wrapped in their own darkness, waiting for morning to come. You raise your glass one last time, a sleepy toast to your sleepless comrades. The warm mug in your hand radiates comfort, though the contents are questionable at best. You stare into it like it might reveal something. Steam curls up into your face, carrying the scent of, is that onion? Oh no. Did you grab the wrong pot again? You take a cautious sip. Yes, that's beef broth. Not tea, not milk. Just a cup of hot, meaty broth at 3:41 a.m. Because in the Victorian era this was considered an entirely valid, even recommended bedtime beverage. Victorians had strong opinions on what should be consumed before bed, and naturally, no one agreed. You might reach for warm milk, a classic choice then as now. But milk in the 1800s didn't exactly come pasteurized. It was often a little chunky. So unless you had a good cow and a better servant, you might end up with something halfway between a drink and a mistake. Still, warm milk was thought to calm the nerves. Add a touch of nutmeg, or cinnamon if you were fancy, and boom, sleep potion. Or if you were a bit daring, a splash of sherry, though that often turned the drink into a confession. Others swore by gruel, a word that sounds as dreary as it tastes. Made from oats, water, and sorrow, gruel was gently heated and served as a neutral stomach soother. You'd eat it with a silver spoon, because apparently the spoon's metal mattered. A fringe belief claimed that silver absorbed night poisons from the digestive tract. Historians still argue whether that idea came from bad science or just someone trying to justify their cutlery collection. There were also more quirky brews. Some Victorians boiled lettuce leaves in water, strained the mush, and drank it down. Lettuce contains lactucarium, a weak sedative. In theory. In reality, you're just drinking hot salad water and hoping it works before you give up and start talking to your wall sconce. You pause now, cup in hand, and contemplate your options. There's still that small bottle of brandy on the side table. The temptation is real. But you recall your neighbor, Mrs. Greaves, who took her brandy nightcap a bit too seriously. Rumor has it she once fell asleep mid-prayer and woke up 3 hours later speaking fluent French, which she did not know before. The Victorian love affair with sleep-inducing beverages wasn't just practical, it was a social ritual. Offering guests a bedtime cordial showed you cared about their rest. Hosting someone overnight? You'd better provide a choice of warm milk, peppermint tea, or oxtail consommé. Yes, meat soup as a prelude to sleep, because apparently Victorians were part Labrador. Some tonics even promised to induce dreamless sleep. Not the peaceful kind, more like turning your brain off like a gas lamp. These tonics included things like bromide salts, which were legal, cheap, and roughly as safe as licking a chemistry set. Victorians loved their bottled solutions, even when they occasionally removed memories or fingernail function. You take another sip of your broth, trying not to think about the cow. Meanwhile, newspapers of the era loved printing conflicting advice. One week, the Times would declare, "Warm beer at night ensures restful sleep," and the next week, the Lancet would solemnly announce, "No adult stomach can tolerate yeast after dusk." You were left to decide who to believe, the doctor, the grocer, or your Aunt Theodora, who drank pickle brine before bed and claimed it gave her prophetic dreams. The irony is that many Victorians didn't actually sleep for very long. Urban life was noisy. Gaslights flared at all hours. Domestic staff rose at 5 a.m., and chimney sweeps often began knocking by dawn, which made the midnight window of peace from about 1 to 4 a.m. oddly precious. A time where you could drink, reflect, and quietly panic without interruption. You walk back to the fireplace and sit again. The embers have cooled into soft red coals. The glow touches your face as you cradle the mug like a relic. Everything in this house is heavy with intention. The curtains are thick enough to muffle thunder. The carpet, though worn, still smells faintly of lemon oil and ash. You listen. Somewhere, a neighbor's dog lets out a single bark. Somewhere else, a clock tower chimes 4 slow notes. Time leaks forward. In the countryside, things are different. There, a Victorian farmer might drink cider or herbal infusions before bed. Chamomile, valerian root, or hops. Yes, hops, as in beer hops, boiled like tea and steeped like regret. Country folk often believed in earth cures, which meant if it grew in the hedgerow and didn't kill your cousin, it was probably good for sleep. But in the city, in London, people were more anxious, more ambitious, more tired, and yet more awake. You glance again at the broth. It's gone lukewarm. You don't know if it's helping, but it's doing something. Maybe it's the warmth. Maybe it's the ritual. Or maybe it's just something to do, a distraction from the endless, echoing silence of not sleeping. You wonder if, years from now, people will look back on us with the same bewilderment. They drank turmeric lattes and listened to whale noises. How quaint. Maybe someone in 2125 will be sipping rehydrated dream paste and judging your midnight oat milk choices. The thought makes you smile. Just a little. There's a strange comfort in knowing people have always been like this. Restless, searching, sipping strange liquids at unreasonable hours. It's a little club across centuries. A secret society of the sleepless. You let the mug rest on the table. You curl your legs beneath you, blanket pulled up to your chin. The fire's glow has faded to nothing. The window glass has fogged gently with dawn's slow breath. Sleep isn't here yet, but it's closer. You're still awake. But now, a curious kind of resolve begins to stir in your spine. Not panic, just a low-burning refusal to lie in bed and wait anymore. The broth didn't help. The laudanum was like a velvet shrug. And counting the seconds between gaslight flickers, honestly, exhausting in its own way. So you rise. And this time, you do something very Victorian indeed. You decide to be productive. The clock reads 4:11 a.m., which means, by certain standards, it's already tomorrow. And while most people are asleep, a small, peculiar breed of Victorians insisted that this hour, this strange, blue-edged pocket of time, was ideal for doing things. You light a candle, shielding the flame with your hand like you're on some sacred mission. Then you walk to the writing desk in the corner. It's cluttered, but elegantly so. Inkwell, blotter, a few unfinished letters. You sit down, straighten your posture, because slouching was considered a character flaw, and dip your pen. You begin to write. A letter, maybe, or a poem, or an entry in your dream journal that reads, "Dreamed I was a tree, spoke fluent Greek, possibly cursed." Many Victorians embraced these nighttime stretches not as failures of sleep, but as opportunities. A concept called segmented sleep was not yet scientific, but very much lived. The idea that sleep came in two parts, first sleep and second sleep, was widely experienced. And in the long pause in between, one might read, write, pray, or embroider the full alphabet onto a handkerchief for no discernible reason. Historians still argue whether this was biological or cultural. Was it the lack of artificial light that shaped sleep this way? Or did people simply accept that sometimes minds had their own schedule? Either way, you now feel a sort of kinship with all those who came before you, quietly making use of insomnia. Take Florence Nightingale, for instance. She was notorious for working through the night, writing letters and hospital notes by candlelight while others snored in their tents. Her insomnia wasn't seen as an affliction, but a virtue. Proof of dedication, brilliance, and perhaps a mild touch of divine punishment. Then, there were the poets. Of course, there were always poets. The Romantics especially thrived on late-night melancholy. One could argue they invented the tortured, moonlit writing session. Lord Byron practically lived in a dressing gown, flitting between despair and rhyme schemes until dawn. You imagine him now, muttering iambic pentameter and misplacing yet another quill under a pile of half-eaten biscuits. You look down at your own page. It's not groundbreaking. Just a letter to your cousin about the cat, who may or may not be plotting to smother you. But it's something. It's an offering to the night, and that counts. You stand, stretch, and wander to your wardrobe. What next? Ironing. Yes, ironing. Don't laugh. Some Victorians ironed their clothing at night, quietly, methodically, especially those with servants to impress, or guests arriving in the morning. There was pride in the ritual, in starch, in pressing creases into reality. You pull out a ruffled collar and set up the small coal-heated flat iron. The warmth is comforting. The hiss of steam sounds like a whisper. For a moment, you feel like you've slipped into some kind of performance, a domestic opera performed by one, scored by ticking clocks and candle crackles. Productivity was often seen as the antidote to madness. If your hands were busy, your mind had somewhere to go. This was the logic behind handcrafts, embroidery, letter writing, Bible copying, and even organizing your sock drawer in alphabetical order of color, which someone in Bath probably did. Of course, not everyone approved. There were moralists, and you can picture them now, hunched over pamphlets, who warned against using late hours for anything but repentance. They said that work done under moonlight was prone to error, and that night was God's time for rest. Still, the quiet rebellion of late-night labor persisted. You imagine a governess mending lace in secret because her employer thought idle hands at night bred scandal. Or a printer correcting proofs by oil lamp because the deadline was noon and the typesetter had run off again. Even Queen Victoria, after Albert's death, was said to wander her rooms at night, writing letters and rearranging furniture. You tidy a few things now, gently folding a throw over the back of the chair, not out of necessity, just to feel the small relief of order in a world that doesn't always give it freely. You make a mental list. Write to Aunt Beatrice about the missing spoons, fix that draft near the pantry, re-sew the button on your walking coat, possibly invent a time machine and skip to breakfast. Your candle has burned halfway down now. The wax has formed a soft pool. It glows like honey. You realize you haven't checked the time in a while. That's a good sign. Outside, a milkman clinks bottles into a crate. You're not sure if this makes you feel ahead of schedule or behind, but either way, the world is starting to stir, and you're not exhausted. You're gently proud, like you've used your insomnia as something noble instead of just tolerated it. You lie back down. The bed, somehow, feels more welcoming. The pillow more forgiving. The sheets warmer. Maybe it's the quiet satisfaction of having done something, of not letting the night win entirely, even if it was just ironing a cravat. You're back under the covers, but of course, sleep still hasn't arrived. Not quite. It dances just out of reach, like a schoolchild you once knew, teasing, twirling, always a step ahead. You stare at the ceiling and feel the heaviness creep in again, not just in your limbs, but in your thoughts. And this time, it's not anxious to-do lists or beef broth regrets. It's something deeper, older, a low, bone-deep hum that says, "What if something is wrong?" It's 4:43 a.m., and now you've entered the superstition zone. Victorians loved superstition the way modern people love kombucha, enthusiastically, inconsistently, and with complete disregard for evidence. And nighttime? Oh, nighttime was prime real estate for irrational fear. You shift your eyes toward the wardrobe. Just a glance. Just to make sure it hasn't moved. Because tonight, your brain, like many a Victorian brain before you, has decided it might be haunted. Historians still argue whether this cultural obsession with nighttime fear was rooted in folklore, fear of death, or simply the result of a nation chronically underlamped. But what's certain is that as the gaslights dimmed, the imaginations flared. The Victorians had a name for this creeping dread: nocturnal visitations. And no, not the friendly kind. These were dreams, or visions, or full-on sleep paralysis episodes involving shadowy figures, whispering voices, and the distinct sensation that someone was standing right behind you, watching, waiting, probably judging your choice of broth. You pull the blanket tighter. You're not alone. Many 19th century journals and diaries reference these strange hours, this waking death, when logic failed and fear took the wheel. A maid in Sussex wrote of being visited by a man of smoke who sat on my chest and hummed a hymn. A banker in Edinburgh claimed he saw his dead wife each night at precisely 3:59, wearing her wedding gloves and mouthing silent accusations. Of course, these might have been dreams, or side effects of dodgy tonics, or unresolved trauma manifesting through the mind's own theater. Still, you glance at the wardrobe again, just in case. Victorian bedrooms weren't exactly designed for comfort, by the way. Heavy drapery, thick upholstery, ornate furniture that seemed to loom rather than sit. A typical middle-class home could feel more like a Gothic novella set piece than a haven of rest. And let's not even start on the mirrors. Mirrors were often covered at night. Why? To prevent spirits from entering the room, or to stop the soul from escaping during dreams. Or perhaps just because no one wants to accidentally catch their reflection mid-insomnia, looking like a startled sea captain. You wonder now if your own mirror is covered. You meant to drape a scarf over it, didn't you? But did you? You get up, slowly, candle in hand. The floorboards groan like old bones as you cross the room. You reach the mirror. Yes, the scarf is there. Good. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Not because you believe, of course. Just in case. Superstition wove itself into every corner of Victorian life, especially when it came to sleep. People believed that certain dreams foretold disaster. If you dreamt of teeth falling out, death would follow. If you dreamt of mud, someone was lying to you. If you dreamt of horses, congratulations. You're either going to inherit something or be trampled emotionally. And if you had no dreams at all, that could be worse. It might mean your soul was off doing something without your permission. Dreams were practically a currency in Victorian spiritual life. Entire books were devoted to interpreting them. Dream dictionaries were kept in bedrooms. People hosted dream discussion breakfasts, which sounds like a mix of charming and deeply exhausting. But beyond dreams, there was a darker belief that waking during the unholy hour, typically between 3 and 4 a.m., was a sign. That someone somewhere was thinking about you, or worse, speaking ill of you. That perhaps your name had just been spoken during a séance. That maybe your deceased Aunt Mildred had something left to say. It wasn't all ghosts and gloom, though. Some people used these wakeful hours for protective rituals. a pinch of salt at the windowsill, a broom turned upside down near the door, reciting the Lord's Prayer backward, not officially recommended, or sleeping with a Bible under the pillow, not to read it, just to keep it near your skull in case thoughts got too loud. You ease back into bed, listening now for signs, any creaks, taps, or temperature shifts. You're not scared exactly, just prepared, in a Victorian way, aware that fear was as much a part of sleep as the mattress. And what of science? Well, science was trying its best. Sleep studies were in their absolute infancy during the Victorian era. Most doctors still blamed nervous disorders for insomnia, often caused by too much reading, corset strain, or women's general existence. The lines between physical health, spiritual health, and moral health were deliciously blurred. A few forward-thinking physicians experimented with magnetism, placing magnets under the pillow to realign energy. Others prescribed cold compresses to the forehead or instructed patients to stare into candlelight until their vision softened into unconsciousness. You try it. You stare at the flame. It wavers and wavers. And for a brief, breathless moment, you feel something loosen. Not sleep, not yet, but that tight electric feeling in your brain starts to flicker out, the way a candle does just before the wick dies. You let yourself drift. If there are ghosts, they'll have to wait. If there are curses, you'll deal with them after breakfast. For now, just quiet. Just the whisper of breath. Just you and the hum of the universe, and the lingering thought that every sleepless Victorian once lay just like this, wondering if the darkness meant doom or just a reminder that even fear has a bedtime. You're back to drifting. Not quite asleep, not quite conscious, somewhere in between, where thoughts melt at the edges and time stops obeying the rules. Then, without warning, your back starts to ache. A slow, creeping discomfort that spreads like ivy under your skin. You shift, first to the left, then the right. Still, the dull ache persists. Your mattress, you realize, is a traitor. Ah, yes, Victorian sleep gadgets. Because in the golden age of soot, empire, and existential dread, why not try to solve insomnia with a bit of leather, brass, and probably danger? You sit up and glance over at the curious object on your bedside shelf. A headband with a metal coil. An early brain soother, designed to press gently on your temples and somehow calm your thoughts. Or possibly encourage telepathy. The instructions are unclear. Victorians were obsessed with inventing sleep aids, not just tinctures and teas, but physical contraptions, strange wearable devices, and full-on bed-based engineering feats. A sleepless person was seen as either ill, morally weak, or perhaps too intelligent for their own good, and all three required equipment. Take the vibrating sleep helmet, for instance. A real thing. It sat atop your head like a salad bowl attached to a motor and delivered rhythmic pulses that supposedly rocked your brain to rest. Unfortunately, it often caused dizziness and, in at least one case, an accidental belief in reincarnation. Or consider the weighted cork mattress, sold in London for a few glorious years. Advertised as earth-grounding and temperature-regulating, it mostly made people sweat profusely and smell like a wine cellar. But for the devout insomniac, no idea was too odd to try. You lie back down and press into your feather-stuffed pillow. It's lumpy in a very personal way, formed over months of nocturnal head thrashing. Victorians didn't yet have orthopedic pillows or memory foam. What they had were bolsters, long sausage-shaped cushions meant to cradle the body into submission. Some swore by them. Others used them to whack snoring spouses. And then there were bed frames, heavy wooden monstrosities, sometimes canopied, sometimes carved with unsettling cherubs or oddly muscular angels. Your own bed creaks ominously as you shift again. The springs are coiled just tightly enough to make you feel judged. Historians still argue whether the design of Victorian furniture was truly about comfort or just about flexing one's walnut import budget. Either way, it often made sleep a secondary goal. You roll to your side, annoyed now by a single loose thread on the edge of the blanket. You tug at it. It unravels slightly. You tug again. It's oddly satisfying. You could unravel this whole thing if you wanted. Destroy it, stitch by stitch, like a mad duchess in a Bronte novel. But no, you let it go. For now. You reach again for the drawer beside your bed. Inside is your most cherished invention, the sleep stick. Not what it sounds like. It's a polished rod of wood, smooth and rounded, meant to be gently rolled over the thighs and calves to induce relaxation. It was sold in 1871 as the Somnambulator, which sounds like a villain in a bedtime horror story, but was actually a proto-massage tool. You give it a try. It's nice, pointless, but nice. There were also weighted blankets, though not marketed that way. Victorians simply called them winter quilts and piled them on like geological layers. By the time you were fully tucked in, you weighed 40 pounds more and resembled a low-rise hillock. Some people found this soothing. Others found it deeply immobilizing. But hey, if you couldn't sleep, at least you couldn't move. You sit up again, sighing. Your bedroom is littered with the remnants of good intentions. A foot warmer, still faintly warm. A lavender sachet, dulled from months of over-sniffing. A porcelain cup half filled with nerve tonic. A liquid that tastes like sadness and steel. And then, sitting proudly in the corner, your sleep chair. Yes, you have a chair. It reclines slightly. It's stiff and weird and smells like linseed oil. But sometimes, when your bed feels like betrayal, the chair becomes sanctuary. Victorians often had sleep chairs, especially those with respiratory issues or anxiety. There's something about sitting upright in the dark, wrapped in a shawl, that screams, "I'm deeply unwell, but dignified about it." You curl into it now, blanket over your knees, hands tucked under your arms like a disapproving aunt. The ticking clock seems a little quieter. Your thoughts, slower. But the gadgets don't stop there. You think of that friend, Horace, who once showed you his bedtime breathing tube. It was meant to regulate airflow, ensuring perfect nocturnal lung rhythm. Mostly, it just whistled. But Horace insisted it improved his dreams. He claimed to have had a lucid conversation with Julius Caesar, in Welsh. You also recall the sleep goggles, designed to block light and apply mild pressure to the eyes. They made you look like a sleepy owl or an avant-garde burglar, but you wore them once and, strangely, had a dreamless night, possibly because they cut off circulation. There were earplugs made from beeswax, aromatherapy pocket stones, miniature bed fans, and even clockwork lullaby machines that played soft mechanical music on loop. Most of them broke. A few caught fire. Still, people tried. Because that was the thing about being a sleepless Victorian. You didn't just accept the misery, you engineered around it. You became a hobbyist of your own exhaustion, an artisan of solutions, a collector of sleepy gizmos and jerry-rigged comfort. And now, nestled awkwardly in your chair, you feel almost amused at yourself, at the strange, sprawling history of human desperation for rest. You pull the blanket tighter. You close your eyes. And even if sleep doesn't come just yet, you can almost hear the faint, comforting click of some long-forgotten contraption purring in the distance, trying its best to help you dream. You wake, but you don't remember falling asleep. Or maybe you never did. Maybe you just drifted into a shallower version of wakefulness, like a leaf resting on still water. Your limbs are heavy now, your eyes dry, and your brain feels like it's been partially ironed. It's 5:51 a.m. You're still in the chair. The first light of dawn is seeping in, just a whisper of gray across the top of the curtains. The shadows that once menaced now seem pathetic. Even the wardrobe, which a few hours ago may have been a portal to your doom, just looks like a piece of furniture again. A dusty, mildly overbearing one. And now, in the tradition of so many weary Victorians, you face the final stage of insomnia: surrender. Because sometimes sleep just doesn't come, and when it doesn't, the best you can do is pretend it did. You stand, stretch carefully, because your neck sounds like a broken piano, and begin the routine. The morning one, which feels entirely too soon. But in the 19th century, if you were awake at this hour, you were expected to do something about it. The first thing you notice is the chill. Victorian homes didn't exactly hold warmth well. You shuffle across the rug toward the basin. Splash some water on your face, cold, sharp, the kind that reminds you of your own mortality. You imagine half of London is doing this same thing right now, bending over ceramic bowls, cursing their decision to stay up reading ghost stories or philosophizing about chimney soot. Victorians were obsessed with routine, particularly mornings. Even if they hadn't slept, they believed in beginning the day correctly. You know, with vigor, prayer, or at least a stern cup of tea. Some even believed that ignoring your routine after a sleepless night could invite madness, that skipping your wash or your morning walk would unravel your mental threads like a spool of cursed lace. So you press forward. You put on your robe, still warm from the chair, and move to the window. You open it just an inch. The air that drifts in is wet and metallic, tinged with coal smoke and the faint sweetness of damp cobblestones. You take a deep breath and feel marginally more human. Then comes the tea. Tea, for the Victorians, was both a comfort and a moral anchor. Entire treatises were written about the virtues of early tea drinking. It wasn't just hydration, it was character building. And if you didn't have tea at the right hour, you risked appearing both physically weak and socially suspect. You light the stove. The kettle takes its time. You wait, head resting on your hand, staring blankly as the flame flickers and hums. You think about how many times this exact moment has happened. Someone, somewhere, in an ill-lit kitchen, waiting for water to boil with a soul full of static. Finally, tea. You steep the leaves carefully, just as you were taught. Not too bitter, not too weak. You add milk because you're not a monster. Then you sit and sip, and somewhere in the dullness of your aching eyes and lukewarm optimism, you realize you've crossed the line from insomniac to functioning husk. Congratulations. You glance at the mantel clock. You've got about an hour before the house wakes up, which means you still have time for the most sacred of all post-insomnia rituals, the morning lie. Yes, when people ask, "Did you sleep well?" you will say, "Yes," like a log. Because that's what Victorians did. They performed well-being. They powdered under their eyes and straightened their collars and went out into the world looking perfectly composed, all while suppressing the urge to nap in a coal bin. Sleep was seen as private, almost impolite to discuss in depth, unless you were aristocracy, in which case it was totally fine to mention your 10-pillow system and your Italian mattress stuffed with peacock down. For everyone else, especially women, talking about insomnia was seen as a mild moral failing, a sign that you were too delicate, too fragile, maybe even a bit hysterical. Men, meanwhile, might brag about their sleepless nights, as if contemplating death until sunrise were a form of intellectual triumph. You stare at your reflection in the tea. You look like someone who fought a mild bear last night. Emotionally, you kind of did. You think about all the other people in town who didn't sleep either. The baker, already dusted in flour. The young clerk practicing arithmetic by gaslight. The artist who stayed up sketching their nightmares until they started looking charming. You're all part of an invisible, involuntary club. No badge, just bags under the eyes. And still, the world will expect you to function. Victorian advice books always suggested a walk in the early morning to restore the humors. You consider it. Maybe later. Right now, you're too much of a folded creature. Half dream, half duty. You pour the rest of the tea into your favorite cup, the one with the tiny crack that only you know about. It's steady, familiar, and in this bleary moment, that's enough. Outside, the light is growing. The rooftops are blue-gray. A cart rattles by on the cobblestones, and the milkman calls out a lazy, "Morning," to no one in particular. You didn't sleep, but you survived the night. And in a Victorian world, where so many nights ended in candle wax, regret, or yet another badly brewed tonic, that counts as a small triumph. You rinse the cup, fold the blanket, run a hand through your hair, and declare yourself presentable enough. Somewhere, a church bell chimes 6. Time to pretend you're rested. Again. The house is beginning to wake now, slowly, begrudgingly, like a cranky cat in a sunbeam. Floorboards creak above. A pipe groans somewhere in the wall. Footsteps pad across the hallway, soft, slippered, uncertain. You remain still for a moment, cradling your second cup of tea. This one's weaker than the first, because you forgot how long it steeped. Still, it's warm, and in the post-insomnia wasteland, that's more than enough. The others in the house have no idea what kind of night you've had. They never do. And you're not about to tell them. That would require energy, eye contact, conversation. No thank you. Instead, you lean into one of the era's great unsung traditions, pretending everything is fine. Victorians, you see, were emotional submarines. All turmoil stayed beneath the surface, unless you were a poet, in which case you were allowed to dramatically cough in public and faint on chaise lounges. But for everyone else, the rule was simple: suppress, 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 especially when it came to sleep. You move quietly through the morning, dressing carefully, brushing out your hair, dabbing a bit of rose water behind your ears. These little actions serve as a disguise, a costume of restfulness. You look in the mirror and think, this is someone who definitely didn't stare at the ceiling for 5 hours, wondering if souls can leak out through the knees. One of the housemaids passes you in the corridor. She curtsies slightly, clearly unaware that she's just brushed shoulders with a walking ghost. You nod politely, and she goes on her way, probably thinking you're just an early riser, not a battler of midnight demons, not a champion of lukewarm beef broth. Downstairs, breakfast is being prepared. You hear the clatter of cookware and the soft whoosh of bellows as the kitchen fire is stoked. There's a strange comfort in these sounds, the machinery of the day grinding into motion. Reliable, rhythmic. Still, you're moving through it all in a haze. Victorians had a word for this state: the morning pall. It was used in letters and diaries to describe that specific post-sleepless heaviness, a kind of cotton-wrapped consciousness. Not quite ill, not quite well. You've slipped into it like a coat. You take your seat at the table. A servant offers toast, eggs, perhaps some stewed prunes if you're feeling lively. You nod vaguely. Your body eats on autopilot while your mind floats 3 feet behind you, still curled up in the chair from earlier, dreaming of not dreaming. Across from you, your cousin is chattering about something, possibly the dog, possibly Parliament. You nod, smile, insert a at regular intervals. The key here is timing, not content. Victorian families were experts at ignoring each other's sleeplessness. Everyone had nights like this, but it was considered poor form to mention them directly. A raised eyebrow, a subtle comment like, "You look a bit pale, dear," was as far as the conversation went. Actual concern? Save that for fainting spells or financial ruin. You excuse yourself as soon as it's polite. Upstairs again, in your bedroom, the morning light is stronger now. The bed, still slightly ruffled, tempts you for a moment. But no, you know the rules. If you nap now, you might never return to normalcy. Or so the books warned. Victorian health manuals discouraged daytime sleep. It was considered a slippery slope, the road to moral decline, or at least to missing afternoon tea. Only the elderly, the ill, or the extremely wealthy were permitted naps. Everyone else was expected to soldier on, preferably while quoting scripture. Still, you glance longingly at the bed. You recall something you read once, that Napoleon could fall asleep in 90 seconds and wake fully alert. Then again, he also crowned himself emperor and kept his hand in his shirt like he had something to hide. So maybe not the best role model. Instead of lying down, you busy your hands, arranging the room, folding yesterday's linen, dusting the edges of the windowsill. This is Victorian Sleep Logic 101. If you can't rest, then simulate calm through order. Maybe if the room looks peaceful, your mind will take the hint. You open a drawer and find a small velvet pouch. Inside is a sachet of dried lavender and rosemary. It's faded now, barely scented. You crush it gently between your fingers, and a faint whiff of something floral escapes, like a memory you'd half forgotten. Lavender was a beloved Victorian sleep aid, tucked into pillows, dabbed behind ears, even baked into little biscuits to nibble before bed. It symbolized purity, calm, and a desperate desire not to scream at 2 a.m. You place the sachet under your pillow just in case. Outside, the streets have begun to buzz. Horse carts, boots on cobblestone, a vendor shouting about eels, as they so often did, apparently. The city has no time for your fragile state, and neither does your schedule. You've got errands, appointments, possibly even guests. You wonder if you'll float through the day or crash into it, but that's a concern for your afternoon self. For now, you sit by the window and let the light find your face. You breathe. Victorians may have believed in potions and gadgets and mystical furniture, but more than anything, they believed in stoicism, the art of carrying on. You haven't slept, but you're dressed, upright, and your tea is still warm. That's enough for now. You press your palm against the window pane. It's warm now, the sun finally asserting itself with a kind of soft, golden insistence. The fog that clung to rooftops has begun to lift, and chimneys puff their morning rituals into the blue. You squint into the brightness and think, maybe I made it. And then you remember. It's only 9:17 a.m. Welcome to the aftermath, the quiet purgatory that follows a Victorian night of full-blown, candlelit insomnia. You've passed through every stage: denial, tea, invention, dread, reluctant productivity, spiritual bargaining. And now, at last, you've arrived at the ultimate punishment. You must now function in society. Victorians, bless their tightly laced hearts, took pride in pushing through. Tired? Then simply apply more rouge, more effort, more starch in the collar. Sleep was a private matter. Public life, meanwhile, waited for no one. You descend the stairs, each creaking step a little heavier than the last. The house smells like soap and hot bread, another reminder that the world has moved on, even if your soul hasn't. You're due at the haberdasher's this morning, or the apothecary, or maybe that cousin's lunch you agreed to weeks ago during a moment of delusion. You tie your boots with the precision of someone trying not to cry. Then you pull on your gloves and step outside. The sun is too bright. The street is too loud. And someone's child is already screaming about a lost marble, which feels deeply unfair to your current spiritual state. You walk, slowly, carefully, like your limbs are rented. Victorian cities were not built for the sleep-deprived. The cobblestones were ankle traps. The soot was relentless. And the people? Relentlessly awake. You nod politely to the baker, who smiles far too widely, and you wonder if it's possible to be both envious and suspicious of someone's energy at the same time. You arrive at your destination, perhaps the apothecary. You open the door, greeted by the soft tinkle of a bell and the overwhelming smell of medicinal ambition. Shelves lined with amber glass bottles, each promising rest, relief, or at the very least, distraction. You ask for something subtle. The apothecary recommends a syrup of poppies and valerian laced with just a whisper of chloroform, You consider it. Then imagine accidentally sleeping through Tuesday. You decline. He then suggests a new product, Dr. Farley's Sleep Electuary, a molasses-thick concoction you're meant to rub onto the roof of your mouth before bed. Supposedly induces thick slumber and prophetic dreams. It also smells faintly like a dead fig. You buy it anyway. Back on the street, you move like fog. You pass women balancing parasols, men pacing through business conversations, and carriages darting like beetles across intersections. And you begin to notice something. You are not alone. Look closer. That man with the slight stumble and the ink stain on his cuff? Sleepless. The woman with the smudge under her eye and the faintly crooked bonnet? Sleepless. You begin to see them everywhere, your fellow sufferers, moving among the world in partial opacity. Historians still argue whether Victorian society actually understood how deeply common insomnia was, or if everyone simply performed rest like it was theater. Either way, you now feel part of something secret, something shared. You walk toward the park, needing space. You sit on a bench near the rose hedges, which are aggressively in bloom. The scent is lovely and obnoxious at the same time. Bees buzz, a dog barks, someone nearby is reading aloud in a language you don't recognize. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to pause. You remember reading about a London solicitor who would spend every lunch hour pretending to nap on this very kind of bench. Not to rest, but to trick his brain into resetting. He called it mind dimming. He lived to 97 and never once admitted to owning a pillow. And then there's the tale of Lady Harrington, who claimed she never slept at all, and instead existed in a state of restful engagement with the universe. She drank iced tea at midnight, painted miniature landscapes before breakfast, and was widely regarded as possibly supernatural. You open your eyes again. Your tea is gone, your bones are humming, and your errands are only half finished. But somewhere, deep beneath the fog of fatigue, you feel something that almost resembles clarity. There's a strange gift in not sleeping. Not always, not consistently, but sometimes. The mind opens in unexpected ways. You remember odd things, like the exact pattern of your grandmother's carpet, or that time you saw a bird hop onto a train carriage and refuse to leave. These memories arrive uninvited, but vivid. As if your brain, untethered from the routine of rest, has decided to go treasure hunting. Victorians often believed that sleeplessness unlocked a kind of heightened sensitivity, that it made one more attuned to the metaphysical. Artists painted better. Musicians composed longer. Poets lost their minds in more elaborate fonts. You think maybe they were on to something, because in this hazy state, you're not fully yourself, but not fully not yourself either. You've stepped sideways into a version of you that watches more than acts, that listens, that sees. You rise from the bench, slowly. You walk back toward the house, not to nap, not yet, but to prepare, because tonight will come again. And you, brave little insomniac, will be ready, with your poppy syrup, your vibrating helmet, and your absolute refusal to accept that rest must look a certain way. You are a Victorian sleeper now, which means you might not sleep at all, but you will endure the night with grace, drama, and at least 2 questionable beverages. You're home again. The front door shuts with that muffled, echoing thud particular to homes older than most countries. It's mid-afternoon now. The light filtering through the parlor window is soft and yellow, like it's been politely aged in a decanter. You hang up your coat and kick off your boots, and the silence of the house settles around you like a heavy shawl. And here it is, the wall. That inevitable moment where body and mind collide after far too long apart. You sit down on the edge of your bed, and suddenly you feel all of it. The fog, the buzzing nerves, the oddly intense craving for stewed pears. But mostly, the bone-deep, brain-numbing, tongue-flattening fatigue. And yet, still, not sleepy. Just tired. Victorians had an entire vocabulary for this feeling. Nervous exhaustion, brain fever, the vapors, and the ever-popular malaise. Doctors described it as the weariness of the soul reflected in the tissues, which is poetic until you realize they were serious and often followed that diagnosis with a bloodletting. You lie back on the bed, fully clothed. It's not an attempt to nap. It's simply the only physical position left. You stare at the ceiling. Again. A spot of old plaster stares back at you. In your hand is the vial of Dr. Farley's sleep electuary from this morning's apothecary adventure. You sniff it. Still smells like fermented raisins and maybe betrayal. You place it gently on the bedside table. Maybe later. What you need now isn't sleep. It's something else. Recovery. Not the kind with tea and blankets and fainting onto a chaise lounge, although that is tempting. No, the Victorian brand of recovery involved rituals of recalibration. Because even if they didn't fully understand insomnia, they absolutely believed it needed to be balanced out. You stand again, because this is no time for collapsing, and move toward the washstand. The water in the basin is lukewarm now, but you splash it over your face like it owes you something. It helps. A little. You remove your gloves, your waistcoat, your pride. You sit in your dressing chair and let the world pause. Many Victorians swore by midday restoratives. These weren't naps, heaven forbid, but structured moments of gentle sensory reset. A walk in the orangery, a slice of sponge cake, 5 minutes of reading a particularly dull moral tract on the perils of excessive leisure. You reach for your copy of Lady Hope's Principles of Respectable Sleep. It is, to put it kindly, aggressively boring. You manage half a paragraph about the alignment of the spine with celestial virtue before your eyes begin to blur. Not close, but blur. You put the book down and instead run a comb slowly through your hair. 1, 2, 3. The simple repetition is strangely hypnotic. Victorians often used monotonous motion as a sleep therapy. Rocking chairs, knitting, slowly polishing doorknobs. One woman in Surrey claimed to have beaten her insomnia by alphabetizing the pantry twice a day. Historians still debate whether this was brilliant or borderline possession. You settle on brushing out your coat with deliberate, tender strokes. It smells faintly of fog, library, and the inside of your pocket. Each motion slows your breath, just a little. Outside, the city hums. But inside, your world is muted. You think about other things Victorians used to reset themselves after sleepless nights. Sitting in total silence for half an hour, soaking their feet in warm vinegar, drinking a raw egg mixed with cinnamon and brandy. No, thank you. Reading psalms aloud until the rhythm dulled the senses, rearranging the sitting room furniture to realign the nervous field. This one's suspect. And always, always, letter writing. Writing about what you couldn't sleep through, about how the night felt, about the fear that maybe you'd never rest again, and the comfort of knowing that others, in other houses, were lying awake just the same. You pull out your stationery set. You write a note, not to anyone in particular, just to Dear You. You describe the feeling of not sleeping, of walking through your own life as though watching it through gauze. You write about broth, about ghost mirrors, about the absolute betrayal of tea after midnight. And then you fold the note, slip it into the drawer, and feel the smallest flicker of relief. Victorians also kept sleep journals. Not just dream logs, but full-blown emotional diaries of their nightly struggles. Historians have found hundreds, filled with entries like, "Woke again at 3, am convinced neighbor's cat is plotting. Saw mother in dream. She said I looked tired. Very rude. Moon too bright, must write to Parliament." You think maybe you'll start one. There's something deeply Victorian and deeply human about acknowledging your sleeplessness not as failure, but as experience, as a thing to witness, to endure, to eventually soften into memory. The light in your room has shifted now. It's late afternoon, golden hour, the most forgiving light there is. You move to the window, cup of something warm in hand, and watch it paint the buildings across the street in shades of nostalgia. You are still tired, profoundly, but you are also calm, calmer than you were last night, calmer than when you sat in the chair with that ridiculous sleep stick, contemplating mortality via embroidery. This isn't victory, but it is progress. And maybe that's enough for today. It's early evening now. Dinner has been eaten, or at least pushed around the plate. Conversations floated by like smoke, polite, pointless, and entirely too loud for your current vibration. Someone asked you about a play. Someone else asked if you'd read the newspaper. You nodded at both. Of course you hadn't. You kept your posture, made eye contact, sipped your soup in measured silence. But now that the dishes are cleared and the house has softened, you're finally able to breathe. This part of the day, the liminal hour, was deeply meaningful to the sleepless Victorian. It was a second chance, a prelude, the twilight between obligation and darkness. If the night before had been a war and the day a truce, then this is the fragile treaty you hope will hold. You light a candle. Its glow flickers gently on the wallpaper, roses slightly faded. You sit again at your dressing table, brushing out your hair in long, slow strokes. Victorians believed in preparing for sleep, not simply falling into it. Sleep was a process, a ritual, almost a form of worship. And you? You are the high priest of trying again. Tonight will be different. Maybe. You've adjusted your routine after all. Less tea, more warm milk, a drop of lavender oil on the pillow. The poppy syrup still sits on the nightstand, but you've yet to uncork it. It's more comforting as a symbol anyway. If all else fails, there's always this. You think of those who came before you, Victorians who, like you, stared into the hearth and wondered if tonight would be kinder. People like John Addington Symonds, who once described sleep as a door I knock upon, knowing it may not open. Or Harriet Martineau, who built entire fictional worlds during her insomniac episodes, then published them as novels while claiming dryly, I sleep as a formality. Even the great Charles Dickens was a renowned midnight walker. He'd pace the darkened London streets for hours, hat low, coat flapping, notebook in hand. People called him strange. He called it research. You pad softly to your writing desk. The ink is already set. You jot down a few things from the day. Not full sentences, just pieces. Saw sunlight on brick, quiet comfort. Smiled at a child, felt unearned. Still tired, still hopeful. You fold the paper and slide it into the drawer with the others, the little archive of your tired mind. Back at your bed now, you straighten the sheets with ceremonial precision. You fluff the pillow. You draw the curtains with a little flourish. You are not surrendering. You are inviting. Historians still argue whether these bedtime rituals truly helped or simply gave structure to the helplessness. But in the absence of control, even a routine can feel like resistance. The house is quiet now, just the soft murmur of wind outside, the occasional shift of the rafters. Somewhere, someone coughs, a distant reminder that you're not the only one awake, or trying not to be. You settle under the quilt. This one's heavier than the others, woven with thick wool and lined with faded floral fabric. It smells faintly of cedar and starch, a little scratchy, perfectly Victorian. You try something new tonight, a bedtime story of your own making. Close your eyes. Imagine a house, small and stone, perched at the edge of a cliff. There's a fire in the hearth and a loaf of bread cooling on the windowsill. You live there. You have a chair that fits your shape and a cat that understands silence. No clocks, no broth, just wind, sea, and the smell of lavender. You stretch your toes and feel the blanket settle into place. One arm curled beneath your head, the other across your chest. Breathe in, breathe out. Victorians were big believers in breath regulation, although they rarely used those words. Softening the lungs, they called it, calming the spirits. One book advised inhaling to the count of 7, then exhaling with a whispered, Amen. You try it. It's not bad. You try again. In, out. And just when you start to believe this might work, the floor creaks. You open one eye. Nothing there. Of course not. You remind yourself of all the ghosts that didn't come last night, all the imaginary horrors that waited in line and didn't get in. Your mind is a velvet rope, and tonight, its bouncer is firm but fair. You close your eye again. Sleep might not come easily, or soon. But there's a peace in not fighting it so hard anymore. You are prepared. You are rested in every way but sleep. And even that feels like progress. Outside, a single carriage rolls past, hooves on stone, A wheel squeaks. You think about all the other insomniacs tonight. The painters, the nannies, the underpaid clerks, the maids with stiff collars, the widows writing letters to no one. You are not alone in this hour. The city doesn't sleep all at once. It dims in patches. It yawns in corners. It hums quietly through the dark. And maybe, just maybe, so do you. Your thoughts are softer now. Less sentence, more sensation. You can still feel the weight of the quilt against your chest, the faint tick of the clock, the echo of your own breath in the stillness. But your awareness is loosening, like a knot that no longer minds being undone. You're not sure how long it's been. Time is doing that thing again, flattening out, folding in. You might have blinked. You might have dreamed with your eyes open. Your room is entirely dark now, save for the faint glow at the curtain's edge. A lamp left on somewhere down the hall, or maybe just the last gasp of moonlight finding you. And now, in the true spirit of Victorian persistence, you begin your final effort to slip beneath sleep's surface. Not a battle this time, not a plea, just a kind of slide. You think about those Victorian sleep books, the ones with titles like Silent Slumber, A Guide for the Genteel, or How to Sleep Like a Christian. The advice was endless. Count backwards from 1,000 by sevens. Envision a blank canvas. Picture a single candle flickering in the dark. And if all else failed, imagine you were already asleep, and simply stay there. You try this last one. You pretend you're asleep. You imagine what you would look like to someone peeking through the keyhole. Still, serene, mysterious in the way only the very tired can be. You regulate your breathing. You soften your jaw. You trick your body into stillness. A kind of magic starts to settle. Victorians were, of course, fascinated by dreams. They recorded them obsessively, interpreted them with terrifying seriousness. A dream of water meant uncertainty. A dream of losing teeth, inevitable death, or an inheritance, depending on your aunt. You wonder what dreams await you tonight, if any. You imagine a garden, but not a perfect one. A bit overgrown, moss between the stones, a cat sleeping on a sun-warmed bench, a breeze that smells like rain and rosemary. Somewhere, a soft bell. Maybe a book in your lap. Maybe not. And for a moment, maybe longer, you're there. The exhaustion has changed now. It's no longer weight. It's buoyancy. You're not being crushed. You're being held. The edge between waking and sleeping has become porous, gentle, like lace in water. You remember something you once read in a diary from 1846. Sleep does not find me. I find it eventually when I stop looking. You roll gently to your side, cradling the pillow like a small secret. The room smells faintly of linen and candle wax. A floorboard sighs in the distance. No panic, no pressure. You've stopped chasing sleep, and in that surrender, it begins to arrive. A softening, a fading. You won't remember this part, but that's the point.